about a month and a half ago, I had an idea. Now, it didn't just come to me in the middle of the day. I actually woke up in the morning with an idea. An idea that I needed to download right to my computer. Download it from my brain and get it on the page, so to speak. So I woke up. Idea running in my head. First thing I did is went straight up the stairs to my office and started typing as fast as I could, trying to get that idea onto the computer before I forgot any details. And that idea, I felt pretty good about it. I got to the end and I was like, it's missing something. And like I said, this is a little over a month and a half ago. I knew I needed to let that idea percolate, let it sit, let it grow. I didn't want to force it because I'd gotten as much out of it as I could. I still felt good about it, but there was something missing. So I let it sit, but I didn't want to let it sit too long. Just put it on the back burner temporarily. And about a week or so later, I wake up again with the key. The little thing that was gonna make it shine, that was gonna make it sparkle. So let me rewind and tell you a little bit about the idea. It centers around two characters in a nuclear missile control center where they control nuclear missile silos. Now that's a real thing. I looked it up. I've done a bit of research on it since the idea. And I was like, basically the essence of the idea is, what if these two people in charge of such danger, such power, have a bad day, a really bad day, a bad day that gets worse and worse and worse. Now they'll still have their wins along the day, but they'll get that win, and things will get tougher. They'll get a little win, but then things will get tougher, and they got more that they have to do. So that's the essence of the idea. I'm not going to dig into all of it, but that's the essence of the idea. The key that I woke up with a couple of weeks later, a week and a half or so later, was that what if it was their first day? I remember my first day of a job where, this was early in my career, I was hired to be an editor for a national television show. And I ended up, in a way, becoming an editor and a producer for that television show. I did that for 8 seasons. It had a nice long run. It was a lot of fun. On my very first day, I was going in to work on the show. I had told the producer in charge, I can do this. I can cut a national television show. Because he asked me, do you think you can edit a national TV show? At that time, I'd never done anything like that before. But I told him yes. In my head, I was a little bit panicked, but I told him yes. I believed I could. I went home and told my wife about the experience, and she's like, you can do this. So on that first day of work, I go in the morning. I'm sitting in the edit suite with the man in charge, the producer, who would later on become my friend, a close friend, Bob Wheeler. And he's showing me the basics of this editing software. And it was a software that I'd never used before. I'd come from a Final Cut Pro background. Now this was, maybe 20 years ago. Has it been that long? I don't know. Maybe not quite 20. It was a while back. And so I had experience with early versions of Final Cut, making some significant projects in Final Cut Pro, and a couple of other editing systems, but I'd never worked with the one that was in front of me, a system called Media 100. I don't even know if it exists anymore. But Bob sits me down in front of a Media 100 system, and I'm thinking, great, all right, we're gonna have a couple of days where he can train me on how to use this edit software before I jump in and start working on the first episode. I couldn't have been more wrong. He sits down, starts showing me the basics, and I'm thinking, great, good, okay, we're getting somewhere. And then about 15 minutes, maybe a half hour, it felt like 2 minutes into that training session, he stands up from his chair and says, all right, I've got to go. I'm flying to, I think, Canada or somewhere else. He was flying to where they were shooting the next episode, and he wasn't going to be back for 2 weeks. And I'm like, okay, in my head, but I'm playing it cool on my face. I'm playing it cool. I can do this. And then he says, there's the manual, points over to a desk, a little console or whatever. He says, there's the manual. If you have any questions, check out the manual. You won't be able to reach me via phone, but when I get back, I want to see a rough cut of the first episode. And I'm thinking, okay. Now I told him, sure, all right, safe travels. I'll see you when you get back. And he left probably 15 minutes after that. And here I am alone in this edit suite. Nobody else in the building. I've got a manual, the software that I've never used, a pile of tapes. Yeah, we were shooting on tape back then. A pile of tapes that represent the episode. And yeah, I'm a little bit nervous. I'm a lot of bit nervous. And I cracked that manual and start figuring out how to get the tapes into the computer. How to start logging tapes. And I'm making notes on what happens on the tapes. And I know I've got to turn this into basically 22 minutes of amazing content for the rough cut. And I don't know how to use this system. I am clueless. I know the 30-minute training session that he gave me, most of it went in one ear and out the other. As much attention as I was trying to pay, it got replaced with some panic there for a moment. And that was my first day on that television show. But when he came back, I had read the manual each night, read it as I needed help along the way. But I knew how to tell a pretty good story, and in that 2 weeks, I put together a pretty good first cut of that show. And we sat down when he returned from his travels and returned from filming one of the other episodes, and we watched it, and I was on pins and needles. I was hoping he would say, oh, this is good. And he did. He said, that's a good rough cut. I think he was a bit relieved too. It didn't play on his face, but the tone of his voice, I could tell he thought to himself, okay, this might be the guy to edit my TV show. And I was. I did it for 8 seasons, along with producing it later on. But that's another story. So that experience of that first day of a little bit of training and then being left to the wolves of this edit software and this pile of tapes and wondering what am I going to do with this pile of tapes and this manual, and then surviving that and ending up with a nice first rough cut, what he asked for, what I hoped for. That, as you can tell, was an experience that's carved into my brain. I won't ever forget the feeling of that. And I thought to myself that morning, about a month ago, what would it be like if your first day was at the control center for a nuclear missile silo control system? That's an intense first day. That's a really different first day. What if everything goes bad on that first day? What if things escalate and get worse and worse and worse on that first day of work? A very intense job. That felt like an idea worth pursuing. So, in the past month, I've pursued that idea. I wrote out kind of a short story version of it. I worked with some index card outlining, and I worked with a paper outline. And I came up with what I kind of call a zero draft. I didn't want to rush into doing a first draft. I've done that before. And while it's fun to rush into a first draft with just the beginnings of an idea and see what you come up with, it doesn't really work that well for me. It works better to do some preparation, and when that preparation is hot, when it's ready, then I'm ready to jump into that first draft and make something special. So that's what I've been doing with this project. And to catch you up, I've got a good idea that I call Zero Draft 0.2. I feel like the idea is pretty polished. And now today, I'm going to start actually refining that idea. I'm going to get to know my characters, the main characters, the supporting characters. There's not that many characters in this particular story because I want to replicate that feeling of having the heroes not have many people they can rely on, and they're not really sure who they can rely on, because I remember sitting there by myself wondering, what do I do? That's a piece of the idea that I want to put in there. I don't want the characters to be alone. I don't want the whole movie to be inside of one character. And it wouldn't make sense because these types of things aren't run by one person. They're run by a pair of people, and they interact with other people. So I want something where it's just a limited cast in a fairly limited environment, and it gets more and more and more intense. And I want two people that are there on their first day. Now, that's not super realistic that you'd be at a nuclear missile control center and not have any training on your first day. It's not realistic at all, actually. But I have a twist on that to make it a little bit more realistic. And it's a twist that's actually not that far out there. I'll get to that another time as we talk a little bit more about what this story is. But essentially, with here on day zero, as I'm calling it, I'm trying to catch you up because I want to take you from idea to finished film. I don't feel like I've seen that on YouTube or the behind the scenes of a film before, where it takes us from idea to finished film in detail. I want to know all the gory details of going from beginning to end. I want to have a record of going from beginning to end, from idea to finished film, and even sharing that finished film with an audience. What's that like? I want to keep a record for myself, and I want to keep a record for you, so you can go along that journey with me and see what it's like to go from day zero to day fill in the blank. So I hope you'll follow me. I hope you'll leave a comment on what you'd like to know about as I go forward with this idea, and maybe what you'd like me to share. I'm going to try and share the ups and the downs of taking an idea to finish film. So I've made a commitment. I'm sticking with this idea. I'm going to see it through the end, and you're going with me.